saying Wi-Fi signals aren't as strong, or they're stronger and more intense than the radio signals you get. So he said, although there's no...
So if Wi-Fi hasn't killed us, we're probably all right.
You're right next to the router, aren't you? It's a short
as well, yeah, I am,
right
in my office.
So.
Yeah.
And at home as well, when you sit
look at me, it hasn't damaged my brain at all.
He's a case in point not to have any investment in 5G until they've done studies on scale.
Yeah. Hello and welcome to another Telecoms.com podcast. I am joined by the usual suspects of Iain and Jamie. It's been a little while. I think the last one we did was about 10 days ago, so good to be back in the game. Just to remind you that if you're watching this on YouTube or on Facebook or on the website, you can listen to it on iTunes or SoundCloud or countless other platforms. Now, what are we going to chat about this week? You two have both been sort of scurrying around to various events. I should point out that since we last did a podcast, I've been to not one but two metal gigs. Right. I went to Download, which was very muddy. Actually, there's a Telecom angle from the Metallica gig I went to last night.
Sure.
Which was in Twickenham Stadium, and I couldn't get any data going at all, even though there was a 4G connection. So there was a capacity.
Too many people.
There was a capacity issue. Yeah. So I suppose the forced Telecom angle, and obviously the only reason I'm bringing this up is just show how rocking I am, even though I'm an old man, is that that was just a real life illustration of a capacity. You know, you can have all the signal you want, but if there's too many people trying to use it,
it's the same in New Year, isn't it? When everybody's on the bridge and no one can get on their phones because everybody's trying to send messages out.
It is. So maybe one day when 5G finally turns up, they'll sort that out.
That's the first use case.
Oh yeah, first use case is Scott being able to show himself moshing at Metallica. Anyway, so yes, you've both been going to events. I'm going to start with, you both went to an event called, was it Digital Britain?
Connecting Britain.
Connecting Britain. Mm-hmm. I've really been paying attention, haven't I? Both went to an event called Connecting Britain. I'm going to start with Jamie, because Jamie, you wrote up an interview with Nokia's UK CEO, which our audience seemed to find quite interesting. So I'll throw the ball to you and get you to tell us about that.
Yeah, so it was quite a big conversation I was having with him. Because he is quite an open chap, and there was two big Cormac Whelan.
There we go.
And there was two sort of elements that sort of we were sort of discussing, which was quite interesting. It was the first one was the idea of Huawei is not the Huawei criticism is not good for anyone.
Right, you mean the action against it by the US and all that?
Yeah. Which isn't exactly new, but it's something we've spoken about a few times. You know, when you're talking about the idea of if no one wants to spend on Huawei, or they're delaying their spend on Huawei, they're not exactly going to spend on anything else because it might be wasted money, or if you spend on Huawei, you might have to rip and replace. So it's this idea of purgatory that a lot of the telcos are in. They're just they've got their checkbooks open, but they don't know what name to put at the top. And the other sort of interesting sort of conversation was mainly around the idea of can we build networks faster? And this ties back to
Bojo.
What Bojo was saying the week before.
We should say Bojo is Boris Johnson,
which and
soon to be the leader of our country.
He is. What was it? So he escalated the rollout plan from 2033 to 2025.
Yes.
And there's so many different problems with that.
And he's just going fibre for everyone by 2025.
Well, yeah. I mean, fundamentally, he's saying, I'm going to connect every premise in the UK with full right to your doorstep fibre by 2025.
If he even makes it to 2020 himself, I'll be impressed. But there we go.
But the big issue is 2033. I mean, that's tough anyway.
2033.
2033 is the current target.
Oh, I see. Right. Okay. And he's brought it back by 8 years.
Yeah, and a lot of the telcos.
So arbitrary, isn't it?
Well, but the thing is that date was was done in consultation with the industry, and that is probably faster than the telcos want to go.
Yeah.
But it's not as fast as the government wants to go. So there's probably a compromise where the government's gone, right, we want you to go faster, and industry has gone and said, well, actually, be realistic. We can't go that fast. And, you wipe 8 years off a 14-year time frame, and all of a sudden you've got to say, well, that's ridiculous.
And one of the Nokia guys' points was, where's the manpower going to come from to do this?
Well,
even if it was financially possible, where are the dudes to actually make it happen?
Yeah, I mean, even a couple of days before that, so I got on the phone to a load of people in the industry and effectively said, "What do you think of this new target?" And the simple message that came back from pretty much everyone is, it's ridiculous. It's just a stupid thing to even suggest. I mean, first of all, where's the money coming from? It's going to cost 30 billion quid to roll out full fibre to everyone in the UK. Okay, where's this 30 billion quid coming from? Because we're not paying for all of it when it's commercially unattractive for us to go to the last 15 to 20%. Ultimately, then you've got to say, well, all the rules and regulations which you've promised to get rid of or promised to reform to make our access more simpler, cheaper, and just takes away all the headaches. They're still in place. When are you going to get rid of those or reform those? And then the last one is ultimately, where are we going to get these bodies from?
That have actually got to do the work.
But Boris never says stupid things, does he?
Yeah.
So what was
Well, do you know what? One thing I'll say in his, not so much in his defence, but in mitigation, I was reading some profiles of him in The Spectator, which I subscribed to, and he was the editor of about 20 years ago. So, they probably got an above average level of awareness of the nature of the bloke. And they were talking just politically how he's really into sort of grand projects, and he's into all this one nation Toryism, which means to some extent empowering parts of the UK apart from the southeast. We know all the wealth generation, all that sort of stuff happens mainly in London, the southeast.
Yeah.
And and then you got sort of Birmingham, Liverpool, Manchester, Newcastle, all that sort of thing. And I think Bojo probably reckons that if you look at somewhere like Korea, where they invested heavily in broadband decades ago, and that seemed to be instrumental in their sort of recovery from the Korean War and all that sort of thing.
There was a more conciliatory take on it the next day, actually, because I think the first day there was a bit of ribbing on stage even, and then as Jamie said,
he's easy to take the piss out of, isn't he? With his silly haircut.
People who don't want to be quoted as sort of saying, well, this is all a bit silly, and then I think they got Clive Selley up on stage on day two. Clive Selley's the CEO of OpenReach, which is the networks bit of BT, basically. Run at arm's length now, but still basically part of the group. Yeah. They're the people who've been the big kind of, they're the ones who are expected to shoulder a lot of the burden in terms of building out the networks, because they're the kind of national incumbent. And he was asked by someone that we all know, Paolo Pescatore, the analyst, was doing the Q&A on stage with him and asked him what he thought of Bojo's plan, and he played the politician. He didn't want to come out and sort of say it's stupid, because obviously if
he might be PM,
Johnson does become PM, he don't want to do that. But so he sort of said, it's a stretch target. But he also made the point, and Paolo said this afterwards, I sort of asked him for a quote. He said, it's good in a way to have ambitions that you might not deliver, because it makes people kind of aim high, and you're not going to achieve it, but maybe by 2025 we'll be a lot further on than we would be otherwise, and there's this push to try and do something.
It's that basic negotiating tactic.
There's a sense that things are improving a bit in the UK with, look at the situation a few years ago, remember, and a lot of these companies that were actually at the show talking about fibre investments weren't around at all. You've got the likes of Hyperoptic and GigaClear and City Fibre all sort of building, all coming out now and building sort of alternative fibre networks, and some of them have quite big plans. I mean, City Fibre's, Jamie will know the figures better than I do. What are they planning on doing by the mid-2020s? Sort of 5 million, is it?
5 million by, 5 million homes. They plan on being able to reach 20% of all UK premises. And then I think
that's mainly London South East, is it?
No, they're everywhere.
They actually avoid London because they think it's well covered.
I must have confused them with someone else.
They started in the Midlands. So Coventry is their big one. They've got a massive presence in places like Portsmouth is massive.
Peterborough.
Scotland, Peterborough, Glasgow. There's loads of them around. I reckon you're thinking of Hyper Optic.
Maybe.
Hyper Optic are the ones in the UK, in London
I'll go
primarily.
with that. If you
They're the
think it's
MDU
plausible, I'll go
guys.
with
They
it.
kind of specialise on multi-dwelling units.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
But even so, I mean, these altnets, firstly, with the targets, I think there's one thing in creating ambitious targets, and then there's another thing which I think is entirely counterproductive, is setting targets that are just completely unrealistic.
Yeah, people just disregard them, won't they?
And that's what this 2025 thing is. I mean, one thing I'll make on the bodies is we've got, first of all, Virgin Media haven't officially told me how many people they're recruiting. So I know you can just go on the financial records and you can see how many bodies they have, but that could be anything. So I don't know how many people they're actually recruiting for these network field jobs. Now, BT has Openreach hired 3,000 people last year, and I think their target is 3,500 to hire this year. So they're adding 6,500 bodies through 10 recruitment and training centres around the UK. How much faster? It's not like slapping a hard hat on Joe Bloggs on the street corner. You can't just, there's a lot of training and there's specialised people, and you've got to think to yourself, trends over the last couple of months. My generation was much more likely to go to university than study an apprenticeship. So firstly, people about my age who don't have the requisite skills to transfer across and be a network engineer. And secondly,
I wonder what that pays. I bet it's not a bad wedge.
I reckon it's all right, but it's the work is going to dry up in about 7 or 8 years.
Where is that?
Yeah.
Which is a problem. So it is a mid-turn objective. You'd have to be trained into something else in 7 or 8 years' time.
Well, it was a contractor job, wasn't it? I think Selly was. So this is one of Selly's concerns, is that related to Brexit actually, and I think the Nokia guy might have said the same thing to Jamie, that a lot of the people that they've used to do those sorts of projects in the past are through third parties that tend to rely quite heavily on Eastern European staff.
Okay.
Now, with all the uncertainty around what might happen and restrictions on freedom of movement and things like that, what Openreach is doing is actually moving to hiring people directly from other places, basically, because of this EU issue. So it's kind of affecting its whole sort of hiring strategy.
I mean, the other thing to consider there is not even just the freedom of movement perspective. I mean, I know that'll be factored into the equation once we go through Brexit.
Yeah.
But ultimately, you've got to consider, if you're Hungarian, let's say, or if you're Polish, or if you're German, the UK isn't the only one that's got these incredibly ambitious broadband plans. So if you're a qualified field engineer for Openreach and you're Hungarian, all of a sudden Hungary do have this massive broadband expansion program on it at the moment. So why not go back? If you haven't got any ties, particularly to the UK aside from work, why not go home and work from there?
Yeah.
Or Poland, they've got the same.
Because you're going to be sitting there worrying about what could happen. Everybody is who's from the EU, who's in the UK at the moment.
I mean, you've got to ask yourself, and I would ask this question if I was living in the States, for instance, and, telco journalism was really starting to take off in the UK. I'd say to myself, what are my ties to the US, and is it more attractive for me to live in the US or go back to my place of my birth, where I've got lots of friends and family, and ultimately set up shop there?
Yeah.
That's one of the big factors, because there is work in Europe as well.
Well, this is an interesting. I'm not going to go off on this tangent much because it's not telecoms, it's political. But it's interesting that you guys talk about this cheaper labour aspect of Brexit, because of course the flip side of that is for
I'm not
people.
Sure if it's cheaper,
I don't think it's cheaper.
I don't think it's cheaper. It's just they can't get.
I think it's
staff
qualified.
Just can't get them at all.
You
Cheaper
don't
or
have
otherwise.
those kinds of people aren't available in the UK.
Yeah.
Because everybody
Well,
here
I
works
guess.
for service industry.
Okay, fair enough.
And also at the scale that we need, because we're maxing out with the number of employees now. If you want us to go faster, you need more employees. I mean, ultimately, building a fibre network is a laborious job.
Yeah, you can't get the staff, Scott.
Well, it is. It's slightly sad, and again, it's another matter that I won't get into. But it's slightly sad that we're not doing better at training people up. Because I mean, this is, a lot of this is relatively. You don't necessarily need a degree to be one of these engineers. So back to what Jamie was just saying about going to university rather than apprenticeship. I wish we were better at apprenticeships for that sort of thing. But anyway, that's a whole big socio-political thing. Yeah, and I thought, and going back to the Huawei thing, Jamie. So basically, this Nokia senior exec is saying, presumably Nokia's not going to sound too sympathetic towards Huawei, but he's just saying the whole situation is just crappy for everyone.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, it does several things. Firstly, it prevents telcos from actually spending any money, because you don't want to spend any money until you've got all the options in front of you, and at the moment, not all the options in front of them.
So that's the point. It's not like people are just going, sod it then, I'll go for Nokia / Ericsson. They're just holding off until the whole thing resolves itself.
I don't think it's had any massive detrimental impact right now, because we're not at a stage where 5G is scaling. We're at a stage at 5G. I mean, they should be making preparations to scale, but you've got to look at the fact that people are just switching on flipping on the switches at the moment and lighting up certain geographical areas. If this goes on for another 2 years, where other countries would have scaled their coverage, then it becomes a real fundamental problem. So that's one element of it. Another element is the idea of casting a shadow across the entire industry. The more security vulnerabilities that are highlighted at Huawei, the more other people are going to start to say, well, what about the other guys? Are they that secure? Like, for instance, and Cormac's example was the emissions scandal with Volkswagen. They were the eye of the storm, but then all of a sudden, before too long, everyone else was going, well, should we check everyone else?
I know.
Should we cause hassle at BMW?
And at risk of sort of overgeneralising the cliche about German companies is that they play by the rules, isn't it?
Yeah.
And yet they were cheating.
I mean, the other, and then the final thing, which is something that Paolo, me and him were talking about, was what's the drip down effect to the consumers? With 5G, with this being in the news all the time, saying Huawei's bad, they're making our 5G networks insecure. The Chinese will be spying on you. Yep. All of a sudden, Joe Bloggs on the street turns around and said, "Well, I've heard so much bad stuff about 5G. Why should I upgrade to a 5G contract when, first of all, the immediate benefit isn't there, and secondly, you're asking me to pay more money for something which the popular media has been telling me is insecure?"
And we're getting, I think this must happen with each new generation, that the old sort of scare stories about radio waves giving you cancer of the head. Yeah, and all that sort of thing.
That's coming out now.
Yeah. There's a whole new. I'm seeing stuff on the internet. People are just freaking out about 5G. Sort of Alex Jones types saying it's aliens trying to control you through 5G or something like that.
Yeah. Well, the other thing to consider there, because it's something I've wanted to look into, but I'll be honest with you, I just never got around to it. But Ray pointed this out last week. Like, okay, fair enough. There's never been any research done to demonstrate how damaging 4G and 5G sort of radio frequencies are, and the spectrum is, and the signals are to your brain. But there has been a lot of research done on how damaging Wi-Fi is to you.
Is it?
And is it?
No, it's not.
Yeah, and so that's effectively mid-band, yeah.
But he's saying Wi-Fi signals aren't as strong, or they're stronger and more intense than the radio signals you get. So he said, although there's no...
So if Wi-Fi hasn't killed us, we're probably all right.
You're right next to the router, aren't you? It's a short
as well, yeah, I am, in my office.
So. Yeah. And at home as well, when you sit down.
Look at me, it hasn't damaged my brain at all.
He's a case in point not to have any investment in 5G until they've done studies on Scott and what effect Wi-Fi has had on him exactly.
Oh my God!
But that was Ray's point. He was just like, ultimately, by process of logic, you can say, well, Wi-Fi hasn't caused a tsunami of tumours all across the UK or the world, so therefore something which is weaker isn't going to cause more damage. So no one's concerned about Wi-Fi, though, are they?
No, good point. And the only remaining sort of frequency band is the sort of millimetre wave. So we can safely assume as we've been using sort of low frequency for ages that's all right. We're assuming
high frequency is never going to get through your hair.
There is that, isn't there? Yeah, the propagation. So you might get cancer of the hair.
You might get some.
Which for a lot of blokes would be welcome.
But,
you
your
get more hair.
Be safe.
Okay, so it's all bollocks then.
Unless you've got a very thin skull.
There is that. Iain, you were there. Anything else apart from So Jamie had his chat with his fellow.
I think the Boris Johnson thing was kind of a bit of a theme for the keynotes, which is where I spent most of my time. And there was some interesting discussion about, and this relates to the challenge of, I suppose, of getting those networks out by 2025. That, as Jamie said, it's partly about the workforce, it's partly about the investments that are required, but it's also for a lot of the other companies that are expected to kind of step up and make these investments, like City Fibre and Hyper Optic. There's still a lot of concern about actually getting access to facilities. And
right.
Part of this making planning permissions easier for site build out, but also kind of being able to get access to equipment that BT's used and specifically the ducts and poles. And there's still kind of quite a lot of unhappiness about that. Yeah, I mean, City Fibre stood up and said it's still not a scalable solution. What we've got, there's been a regulatory push to make that whole DPA, duct and pole access, a more.
Why is it not scalable?
Product. They said doesn't. The way it's done at the moment, it's not a scalable solution.
They've got to ask permission each time.
It needs.
They've got to just have open-ended. You help yourself.
Didn't go into the details, but they're not happy with how it is. And meanwhile, you've still got Vodafone sort of grumbling about. And this came out a few weeks ago, not at the event, but still sort of moaning about access to dark fibre, which is a different type of product. A sort of existing fibre
I've written about
network that BT has that they want to use to put their own sort of electronics in, and they're still not happy about that because they want to use that for mobile backhaul. So there's still.
And then you get you quite often get OpenReach when this stuff comes up, going, well, we might be able to connect this many homes by this date, but only if the wind's blowing in the right direction, and only and there's always the sort of, if it's not explicitly stated, it's always implied, only if the state gives us a nice lot of cash to help it along. Now,
I am conditions are right.
I am a bit sympathetic with that because it's at the same time. Yes, okay, it is an excuse not to spend money, but you've also got to take into consideration that these guys, they're not MPOs, they're not charities, they're still commercial organisations that have to make money. So it's like me for I don't know, like our coverage, for instance. Yeah. Why on earth would we write about sort of network expansion in the Philippines when we don't have any readers?
Or the government coming up to us and saying we've got to suddenly write 20 pieces a day.
Yeah,
and we go, well, how are we going to do that? No, I do agree with you. I was just leading up to that. They're private enterprises, and yet the matter of coverage, both mobile and fibre, has become a political issue. And I think they're entitled to go, all right, then, if it's a political issue, chuck us some public cash. If you don't, then we will build it out because it's in our business interest to do it, but we'll do it on our schedule.
Yeah,
I mean,
that's the big issue.
If you want to force a schedule on us, then make it worth our while.
That's been the long-running issue in the era of privatisation, that they have their shareholders to answer to, and their shareholders don't want them running around pumping loads of money into fibre projects in Devon when people are only going to carry on spending 20 quid a month for your fibre.
I mean, this is the other thing that's always worth taking into consideration, is that I'm not entirely. Everyone's obsessed and absolutely obsessed with fibre, and that should be the focus long term. But over the mid-term, I'm still not entirely convinced that the actual thingamabob is still there. That the customer demand. Yes, okay, there is fibre uptake, and they're talking about 7% of homes passed now for fibre, which is impressive. Don't get me wrong, considering how lowly we were a couple of years ago. But ultimately, uptake is only 1.5%. So the people have the product, yet then they have the opportunity to buy the product, but they're not buying it. So clearly there's the customer, and this is one thing that I noted at the event when they were talking about, customer demand is there. You should carry on investing in us. You should carry on letting us scale because customer demand is there. And you had someone from 3 turning around going, well, technically I'm one of your customers. Yeah. I'm not, because I buy backhaul, I buy up to the cabinets because I've got fixed wireless access, and they're turning around and going, we're not convinced that the customer demand is there for gigabit speed, and we're not entirely convinced.
And they didn't really listen, did they?
Yeah, they were just went, oh no, customer demand is there. Yeah. And it's like, well, no.
Well,
this guy knows more about selling to the consumer than you do, because you guys are primarily wholesalers.
Yeah.
You've got the CEO of, a direct-to-consumer business. He knows what he's talking about.
Yeah, I mean, those guys like City Fibre, their big thing is provide higher speeds, but at a lower price than the products you get from BT. So you can understand why BT is not very happy about something like that, because if they start, customer demand would be there if you went and built a fibre to the home network and then started selling it to consumers for less than they get their copper-based broadband services. Only an idiot would not subscribe, because you're going to get a more reliable connection for less money. But what's the investment case for a company that already has an extensively deployed broadband network? What's the investment case for them to do that?
Because the marginal gains are pretty minimal. Okay.
Well, they're losing money and spending more.
I mean, this is one of the things where I like the idea of, and I think Sally's coming round to the idea that you don't need fibre everywhere as well, because let me rephrase that. You don't need fibre everywhere right now.
I think BT's always been a bit of a fan of for G-Fast and all that. No,
but if you look at their communications over the last 12 to 18 months,
it's
always been
they've had to, haven't they?
Yeah. But he turned around and he said, and I completely agree with this logic, and he highlighted fixed wireless access, balloons, satellites. You can actually deliver the desired speeds over these alternative technologies. So I think, and this is something that I've been sort of focusing on over the last sort of week or so, is that, an objective like the UK broadband or UK connectivity plan should be outcome focused, not technology focused. And at the moment, it is technology focused.
That was one of the things you wrote from there, wasn't it?
Yeah, we're obsessed with fibre, but why not build? Why not focus?
If we're getting the bandwidth we want by whatever means,
why not let these wholesalers focus onto the cabinet when the biggest issue for them is the last mile? But if you've got fibre to the cabinets, why can't you go fixed wireless access to, or satellite or copper, upgraded copper for the last mile, if you're actually delivering a service which is good.
But this is the other thing, is that because there's this obsession with fibre and having fibre to the home, and we even got shown those rankings with the UK right at the bottom. The UK, actually, if you look at Analysis Mason rankings and stuff that people like Matt Yardy put together, they rank pretty highly on broadband for exactly the reasons you just laid out. Fibre to the curb is quite widely deployed now. Most people are using connections that are part fibre based. There are always not spots and there are always rural areas where you can't get decent services. But in terms of broadband rankings, where they're not actually looking at the technology, they're just saying what is the average speed that a customer is getting across a country, we come out of it pretty well.
I mean, why not stagger the plan? The first phase should be fibre to the cabinet everywhere. And once you've got fibre to the cabinet area, or once you've got 70% penetration of fibre to the cabinet, then the easiest 40% you can move on to phase 2 and you can go all the way to the home. But then the last 30% you're working over that for the next 2 years to focus entirely on fibre to the cabinet. Yeah. And then once you've got 100% penetration of fibre to the cabinet in 5 years, let's say, at the same time you're delivering higher speeds through the idea of fixed wireless access. When 5G fixed wireless access becomes available, and you can start delivering these incredible services. Then you focus on full fibre everywhere. Yeah. For me, it just doesn't seem like the most.
But that's always been at BT's thing. That's always been, and I don't know what the current availability is of FTTC, but it's pretty high because that's been their investment plan for a long time, and they're providing that over a lot of the country. But that's always been their thing. And the Deutsche Telekom says the same thing. It makes sense to take a step-by-step approach. Yeah. But the whole government push recently, the whole industry focus has been on full fibre. There's a sort of obsession with it.
Wasn't there like so it shifted in about the last 2 to 3 years, let's say. But prior to that, it was we can deliver fibre to the interconnection or the BT thing about the
cabinet.
Not the cabinet, one stage back.
Right.
But you can
fibre to cabinet is pretty widely available now.
But prior to that, it was we can get G-Fast. We can get G-Fast to the cabinet, and that should be
further out than fibre to the cabinet. So normally what you do with G-Fast is basically fibre to the distribution point. So you have these little boxes that are about 50 metres away from homes.
Yeah.
And you have to build out more fibre.
The green boxes.
So you go to the cabinet and then you roll out more fibre, but you don't roll it all the way. So you use the last little bit is still a copper connection, but you're having to make some more fibre investments. What BT said with G-Fast was quite radical because they said we can basically use our existing fibre to the cabinet footprint, which is quite extensive, and use G-Fast over a longer distance, because they felt the technology had improved so much that it was actually going to work over distances of, I think the average distance from a cabinet's about 300 metres in the UK. So they were saying we can use G-Fast over this longer distance. But G-Fast has now almost become redundant, a forgotten technology, because everybody's like, oh, they need to do full fibre. G-Fast isn't going to be good enough.
I lost interest when they dropped the dot.
That was a house style thing, but
that's
happened.
Well, that's G-Fast just hasn't got the same panache as G.Fast.
I mean, this is the one thing that really, that again, this is a massive oversight from the government, and this is why they're so obsessed with technology, not on the outcome. If they were outcome based, one of the areas of legislation that they could have addressed years and years ago was multi-dwelling units and new builds. Now, why isn't it a regulatory requirement that anyone who's building...
There's been some talk of that, isn't there, with new builds?
It's still not in law,
It's not in law.
But if you put it in law and you say, if you're building something new, it's got to be fibre. Mm-hmm. You've got to give access to the telcos. So when you are building this 50 flat units, you've got to give access to the telcos so they can throw fibre in there at the very beginning. And that isn't... There are people who will do that, and they will give companies like Hyperoptic, who's very popular with doing it in London, access to this unit. But why isn't this built into law so everyone has to do it, irrelevant of where they are?
Okay,
Did that come up as well, actually, at the conference? Someone was complaining about that. I seem to remember in one of the keynotes.
So someone complained about it to me the other week when we were talking about the Bojo comments.
Yeah.
I shan't say who complained.
I'm going to grab this by the scruff of the neck, because we've been talking about this a while and we've got other stuff to talk about. I just realised I didn't do the thing at the start, Pierre, where I said what we're going to talk about. So we're going to talk about what we just spoke about, and now we're going to talk about Iain, who went and hung out with Orange this morning, which is why you're looking smart again. Not that you don't always look smart.
Yeah.
I like to see you make a special effort when you're going to meet these people. What do Orange have to say for themselves?
Yeah, so it's basically an update on what's going on in Africa and the Middle East.
Because they're pretty big on...
They are,
in Africa,
they're in about 19 countries in that region, but mostly in Africa, and there's just a couple in the Middle East. And that's been like a big growth driver for them over the last decade. I think, so they had very senior executives there. Ramon Fernandez, who's the CFO, but also looks after the kind of Europe, Middle East and Africa part of the business too. And then they had someone whose name I'm not going to be able to pronounce, who's fairly new, and he's actually CEO of Orange Africa in the Middle East. So I'm going to have to look it up now, because that's just silly not being able to pronounce his name. But they're basically saying that the growth rate in Africa over the last decade has been about 4.3% sort of sales going up.
Okay.
And they're targeting the continued growth at that level. It's just the focus is shifting quite a lot. So they had a lot of interesting data on like the decline of the voice business. Not unexpected. It's the sort of thing that's been happening in Western markets for a long time.
Yeah.
But really quite a sharp drop off in terms of how much it's contributing to overall revenues now. It's gone down to about a half from 2/3 in the last couple of years.
So lots of Africa, they can get hold of at least 3G, if not a 4G connection.
Yeah, so 4G they now have. I mean, it's still not I think it's about 17 million people on 4G, and they've got about 120 million subscribers in that region. A lot of the other ones would be on 3G services, I'm guessing. But in terms of money from overall data services, which includes mobile money as well, so it's a much more basic kind of data connection. That's basically made up the shortfall and helped to kind of add a bit on top. And the focus now is really kind of concentrating on that data business and the mobile money business, and trying to push that into new areas. So they're doing similar things to what they've already done in Europe. They're going after banking licenses in West Africa with the intention of launching banking services.
They're going to have to deal with that. Did Facebook come up at all in that context?
Only in terms of what kind of services are popular on smartphones.
Because I mean, this is a bit of a tangent. I won't get into it deeply, but they just announced this new cryptocurrency that they're making called Libra.
Yeah.
And the point of this currency, and I don't even know if it's strictly a cryptocurrency. They call it a stable coin because it's pegged to proper currency.
Yeah, it's pegged to the dollar, isn't it?
Yeah, so it doesn't go all over the shop like Bitcoin
it would have been a good
does.
thing to ask them about.
Yeah, I know. It just occurred to me now while we're sat here, but But one of the big stated aims of this cryptocurrency is to introduce sort of mobile money to developing countries where they don't have access to regular banking. So similar to all the stuff that they've been talking about, like M-Pesa and stuff.
That the Orange thing just undermines that. Then it undermines the concept of Facebook's cryptocurrency, because if you're going to take a digital currency to people who don't have access to traditional banking facilities, it requires the internet. Now, if Orange can deliver a traditional banking service, but it being digital first, all they need is technically ID and an internet connection.
Yeah.
So if Orange are successful in rolling out this banking service to the remote regions, it kind of completely undermines the value.
And it would be the classic paradigm of telcos versus OTTs.
Yeah.
Where for once the telcos are actually using their advantage and having the billing relationship and having all that stuff already there.
I think that's the other thing. So the other big push for them as well is to go into the sort of business sector as well, which involves trying to get into cloud services and do stuff through the data centres they have. And they got quizzed about this because there's a bit of analyst scepticism that telcos can really kind of succeed in that market. And in Africa, it's very much a kind of co-location opportunity. A lot of it's done from South Africa. Right. So they got asked, what kind of services are you going to provide? But the Orange, the CEO guy, whose name I can't remember, which is really embarrassing, but he basically said...
The one you couldn't pronounce even if you could remember it.
Yeah, probably not. Right. But he said there's a lot of kind of government support for like the idea of telcos being banking providers, because people have been unbanked. And there's also I think there's a lot of awareness in Africa at the moment about the sort of big tech companies.
Yeah.
And a lot of that relates to kind of things like data protection. So there are regulations being introduced about having data stored within the country and, not being able to use outside data centres. And they kind of see that as an opportunity to do things that they might not be able to do if the big guys, if the big kind of web players were, given sort of freer rein, I suppose.
I mean, I know that there's a lot of scepticism from the analysts about how effectively telcos can operate in these sort of diversified biz-to-biz services, especially when you've got sort of like integrators like Capita and stuff like that, who are plugging the gap at plug in the gap of incompetence from the telcos. But from Orange's perspective, I mean, they spent north of $1 billion over the last 12 to 18 months on acquiring new businesses for OBS, and that's been primarily focused around cybersecurity and data analytics, I think. So they're really rapidly improving their core competence through acquisition, not organically, which ultimately I think it's a much more expensive way to go about it, but it's a much quicker way to go about it. So they do have they arguably, if they're buying the right people, they have the right competence in house.
And they're talking a lot. They talked about leveraging some of those investments in Orange Business Services, especially in cybersecurity, to kind of start providing some of those services in the African region as well. The other thing that came out, which actually a press release on, I think Jamie wrote about it as well, is this investment they've made in a company called KaiOS Technologies, which has its own sort of smartphone operating system.
They call
it
a
spin-off from
I was
Mozilla,
checking it out when I was editing Jamie's piece. They actually describe it as a sort of smart feature phone platform. So basically, it's much more rudimentary phones than these.
Yes,
but it's not feature phones as they were 20 years ago. They've still got little colour screens. But they might not even be touchscreen. I'm not sure. But basically, an incredibly stripped down rudimentary OS. But it would still give you access to some apps.
Well, this is behind some of their growth forecasts, because they're talking about. I mean, you asked how many 4G customers they have, and they're talking about envisaging sort of massive numbers of people using data services in the next few years, and that is partly through that. So they introduced this device in several markets earlier this year called I think it's called Senza, and this is the one that
Sansa.
This is the
like Game of Thrones, Pierre.
This is the one that uses the KaiOS system, and it's the smartphone cost itself is only about $20. So it's all about getting low-cost devices into the hands of people who then want to get data subscriptions. They want to make use of mobile money services and kind of fancier stuff, and that supports. So a lot of this 5% revenue growth target that they think they can carry on delivering is based on sort of some of the initiatives that they made in areas like that.
Well, it's a means to an end, isn't it? I mean, so the story about KaiOS that emerged today was that they've had their Series B funding round, and Orange was one of the contributors. Now, they haven't actually said how much money they put in. It was 50 million total for the funding rounds. Orange wasn't lead partner, but it is contributing. But it's kind of like what are you grimacing for?
Oh, what's he done?
It's kind of like the business case for Android. So like Android doesn't actually make any money for Google, because ultimately it's an open source piece of software.
Yeah, not software licensing from the OS. Yeah.
But if you actually have a look at what is going on there,
you said
Google switched on.
Use your phones, come on.
Well, Google Assistant switched on then.
Yeah, it just suddenly started listening to him.
But then, they do make money for Google because of the install base. When I'm talking about sort of like the Chrome is the default search engine, and Google Play Store is the default place you get your apps.
They make tons of money indirectly on top of it.
Yes, yeah. But that's exactly the same thing with Orange's investment in KaiOS. I mean, the easier it is for African citizens to get their hands on the internet, the more money that Orange makes.
Totally, and that's one of the reasons Facebook's got involved in. There's some projects about increasing sort of coverage in remote areas. Yeah, they've all got a vested interest, and that's fine.
Actually, and even Google is actually an investor in KaiOS as well.
Yeah, I'm not surprised to hear it.
And I think Facebook is as well.
Not surprised to hear it. I mean, Google's never threatened to make a stripped-down version of Android that would work on feature phones, so it might as well have a piece of whoever is. Can I just make one point about that, us waking up your voice UI?
I must have said that.
Okay, you said Google, maybe you said okay, I'm going to risk waking mine up now.
Yeah.
But it's just an interesting little side point. They say that these things aren't constantly listening to you, yeah? It's only when you activate them. But they must be listening to you in order for you to be able to activate them with your voice in the first place.
To the queue. It's a buffer to listen to the queue.
Bollocks. They're listening to everything. Anyway, that sort of slightly leads me on to my chosen topic of the day, which is sort of legislation, US legislation as it affects telcos and tech. So I've written a couple of stories this week, which I think are just interesting in terms of things like legal precedent and for our particular sector. The first is that one senator, a chap called Marco Rubio, who once tweeted a light reading story. Do you remember? Iain?
Retweeted,
I do, yeah. Something that Robert Clark wrote.
That's right, yeah. Where Robert Clark wrote up some Huawei person telling him to get back in his box, and he got all petulant on Twitter about it, didn't he?
Yeah.
He obviously is not a fan of Huawei, and now he's trying to pass some weird little, I don't know if it's legislation or just set a precedent, but basically Huawei's decided that Verizon owes it about $1 billion in patent royalties or patent license fees, and it wants to go after it. Now, there's a feeling that maybe it's doing it just to go, all right, US, you're coming after us, we'll come after some of your guys, see how you like it.
Yeah.
Because, I can't believe Huawei just suddenly went, hold on a sec, Verizon owes us $1 billion. This must have been something they were either aware of before or not. But then Rubio's going, right, let's make it so that Huawei cannot use our patent courts or our patent legal system at all. And you sort of think, all right, maybe he's protecting his own company. But then you think about the implications of a senator just unilaterally suspending the rule of law for a company just because they've decided they don't like them or they don't even like the country they've come from. You think, okay, even if you feel hostile to Huawei, I don't, but let's say hypothetically you do, and you go, all right, well, if it's Huawei today, who gets the rule of law suspended tomorrow? That's why these things have to be absolute, and why you even have to apply the law to companies or countries that you don't like. And one other point about this is when you suspend the rule of law, you're sort of indicating that you think if the law did run its course, you would get an adversarial outcome. So then why have the law at all? In other words, if they think Huawei's case against Verizon is weak or baseless, then let the law run its course and it won't get through the courts. So that's an alarming one. And then
but effectively what they're saying there is that If they say it with Huawei, and I'm assuming because of the way they phrase these sorts of things, they're talking about Chinese companies as opposed to Huawei, because they very rarely name the company.
Well, this was a Reuters report, so we can take it a little bit of a pinch of salt. We don't have it sort of from a primary source, but Huawei, I think, was specifically named in this Reuters report.
Okay.
Because it is this Verizon thing.
But then, if this is the case, I mean, does that mean that all US firms and you're effectively suspending Chinese companies from using the US patent systems? Does that effectively say that all US companies are allowed to rip off Chinese IP because
they can't defend themselves?
Because they can't defend themselves because they've got no access to the patent courts.
And then there's a flip side, which is if we assume these things tend to produce reciprocal action, China goes, all right then, none of your patents are protected in China. Now, some people might go, well, were they ever? But that's another matter. But now they could just officially go, yeah, fine, we're just going to give all Chinese companies free license to rip your stuff off. So, this is the danger of these sorts of escalations.
Don't they do that anyway?
Well, that was my sardonic point. That's certainly what they stand accused of. Obviously, without primary evidence, I wouldn't dream of forming a strong conclusion one way or the other. But yes, there's definitely a rich history of accusations of industrial espionage going in that direction. Another point. So back to that patent thing for US companies. Imagine you're Qualcomm, that's got a ton of patents getting used by Huawei, by all the Chinese smartphone makers, by various people in the mobile value chain, and suddenly they can't defend any of their patents in China. It would be catastrophic for them. So anyway, that was a weird thing to do. And then another one, which I thought is going to set an interesting precedent, I was just writing about today. So you all know I've got a particular interest in sort of censorship, freedom of speech, and how it occurs on the internet platforms, social media especially. And there's been a lot of it going on recently. And Donald Trump recently has been sort of tweeting how it's out of order in that sort of idiosyncratic way that he does, with lots of exclamation marks at the end and block capitals. And now this senator, whose name I forget, and his name doesn't really matter, is trying to pass a bill. In fact, I will look it up because the name of the bill probably does matter. He's trying to pass a bill that is called, drum roll please, see what our internet connection's like, Ending Support for Internet Censorship Act. Now, long and short of this is that internet platforms, there's two ways in which if you're putting information to the public domain over the internet, you can be classified. You can be a publisher, such as Telecoms.com and Light Reading, where we are legally liable for all the content that goes up on our sites. I believe probably even the comments, so we probably have to keep an eye on that, but certainly anything we write and publish. Or you can be a platform which says that you're just a sort of neutral sort of town square where you're just creating a space for other people to bang on about this, that and the other, if you're YouTube, for other people to upload whatever videos they've made. But then you should be neutral. But increasingly, these platforms are censoring. They're saying, well, no, we're not going to have this type of content, we're not going to have that kind of content and the other. With YouTube, it tends to be typically because advertisers get scared if someone puts up something too crazy and the ads get served against it. There's sort of political pressure, there's pressure from activists, but basically, increasingly, and I've written lots of stories and people were aware of it, all the platforms, Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, are all going, right, we're going to ban this, we're going to ban this person, we're going to ban this type of content, this type of language, all that sort of thing. And this senator, I've got the story up, so I can tell you who he is. Josh Hawley is basically going, well, if they're censoring, then they're basically, anything they don't censor, they're basically saying they approve of. So they're basically acting as publishers. They're saying we approve of this content and we don't approve of this content, much as we do in our journalistic capacity. So if they're acting as publishers, they should have this, there's this protection in US law called Section 230. They should have that, which gives them that legal protection where if I went on Facebook and wrote something really crazy up there, they couldn't get sued for what I wrote. They're saying that they shouldn't have that protection because they're now acting as publishers, and that by itself I think is quite coherent because I think they are increasingly acting as publishers. His solution, however, I'm not so keen on. His solution is to say that they've got to apply for this protection with the FTC or with the FCC, one of those Fs.
Right. One of the federal dudes.
Yeah, one of the federal sort of regulator types. And basically prove that they are being politically unbiased in their censorship, because this guy's a Republican, he's probably got Trump behind him, and there's a general feeling, and there's a fair bit of anecdotal evidence to support it, that a lot of the censorship is anti what they call conservative in the States, right wing. And so they've got to kind of prove that they're being politically neutral. The reason I think that's dodgy is that now you're putting the power of censorship effectively in the hands of the state, and there's plenty of precedent to say that the state will probably abuse that position. And rather than try and steer a course of pure political neutrality, whoever's in power will probably try and skew it in their favour. That's just human nature. That's how it'll go. So you're getting lots of people like the Electronic Frontier Foundation going, this is crazy stuff. You're getting other people going, well, good, because they've overstepped their mark and they need censoring. I mean, they need sort of correcting and regulating. So anyway, those are two.
I mean, the other point to consider there is, so what? So what if they're biased towards one party or the other, or lean one way on the political spectrum? If he wants to regulate them as publishers, he can't dictate that they be politically biased.
Yeah, but if he regulates them as publishers, then their whole business model's down the toilet.
Yeah, but his point is completely moot, because all publishers lean one way or the other. So you can't say to them, you have to be a publisher and you have to be neutral. Because
No, that's not what he's saying. He's saying, if you want to stay a platform, you've got to be neutral. If you want to be biased, then we'll make you a publisher, and then you don't have this Section 230 protection.
Okay.
My proposed solution for this would just be to, and I think I might have said this on the pod before, is just to make it illegal, if you want to be a platform, for you to censor anything that isn't in itself illegal. So there are certain censorship laws built into everything. You can't explicitly call for violence against an individual, or possibly even a group of people. And there'll be various other things that you can't do. There's certain things you can't say. I think there's laws about things like Holocaust denial and that sort of thing, depending on the country. So basically, make it so they're not allowed to censor anything unless they know that speech directly contravenes the law of that country. That would be my solution. There's probably all sorts of problems with that. For example, the laws are different for different countries. But I don't think necessarily handing the power of censorship from one large body to another is the solution. But this issue of publisher versus platform is going to go on for quite a while. And I don't think there's a neat solution to it, because I can't think of a middle ground. What's halfway between a publisher and a platform? Legally. I can't think of one.
No.
So, so that's that really. That was a bit of a rant. I didn't really sort of open that up for discussion very much, sorry. But I thought it was interesting, yeah. Okay, well, on that note, I think we've gone for about an hour anyway. So on that note, I'll wrap it up. Thanks for indulging my rant, you two.
No worries.
And thanks for indulging the audience, and make sure you join us for the next one.